Hello there, and welcome to Weird Music on the Glumberger channel. The strange music show that takes a different album each and every week, generates a discussion about it for you to talk about it if you want to or not. Or you can just listen to me waffle away for like 20 odd minutes or however long this episode's going to be, right? So, in today's episode, we are once again taking a look at an album from Sedimental Records, a peculiar label with a bizarre discography of experimental releases, ranging from pure freeform jazz to non-music, lowercase, and even drones here and there. So in our last episodes covering this label, we looked at David Gross's Things I Found to Be True, which is just non-music jazz, I guess you could call it. And then we also looked at Thanks Cash, the collaborative album that generated a very angry discussion on the nature of music and what is and what isn't, which was hysterical. So in today's episode, we're actually looking at nothing like that, to be fair. This is a bit of an enigmatic recording from the label in that it's a bit more straightforward in terms of its musical notions, though it is one that still contains a multitude of experimental ideas here and there. What is also interesting is this album is next to impossible to find online. I don't know how it was, but it was probably like a decade ago. I managed to acquire somehow a download of this album from some very dodgy website, I'm assuming. Which one, I don't know. I cannot remember, but as a result, I've always had this one in my digital collection, and it's always been one of my favourite things to listen to. However, so learning from past Glumberger's mistakes, I decided the right thing to do would be to purchase a physical copy. So today I present The Weird Weeds by The Weird Weeds. Right, so of course, who are the Weird Weeds? Well, the Weird Weeds are a quartet, a band without a country apparently, comprised of members Sandy Ewan on guitar and vocals, Nick Hennies on drums and vocals, Aaron Russell's on guitar and vocals, and one Lindsay Verrill on bass and vocals. And so, the Weird Weeds, a odd, slightly unclassifiable band with 5 albums under their belt spanning from the years of 2004 to 2012. With the album we're looking at today, The Weird Weeds, being the last studio album they recorded before they all just called it a day, essentially. So yes, The Weird Weeds, a self-titled album released on vinyl by Sedimental Records, and yes, the same Sedimental Records as mentioned released David Gross's Things I Know to Be True and Thanks Cash. So yes, Sedimental, very unusual label in that they offer so many weird proto-jazz and lowercase albums. And yet here with The Weird Weeds' final album, essentially, we've got some very patient, slow, experimental post-rock of sorts. Almost jazzy on some levels, but delightfully down-tempo and featuring a whole bunch of peculiar droning soundscapes that push forward this very strange audio journey. It's actually quite interesting, because although all the band members are credited as doing vocals, there are none on this album. This is all entirely instrumental here, which is weird. I mean, not weird, but maybe weird for the Weird Weeds. It's without a doubt, though, one of my favourite things to Sedimental Records, and something I'm so glad to now have a physical copy of, even though I have no way to play this. At some point I will figure that out, but at the moment it's just kind of funny, I think. But yes, it's something I've wanted to talk about, so yeah, let's dive into it, shall we? So, on this album, all of the tracks are untitled, represented as a dash. And so we have very little to go on, because usually track names give us a little bit more information about sort of the vibe and what to expect, and this one, we don't have that. However, when does that usually stop us? So for the sake of this review, I'm just going to refer to each track by the ordering of the album, just to make things easier for us. So opening up with track 1, we have a quaint little opening of stuttering notes, a small little arpeggio, and a lovely sound palette that builds around it, creating this cautious yet gentle opener that sets the scene off rather pleasantly. There's a great deal of curiosity that this track is presenting though, starting the album off on this rather nice note that remains in place for just a few minutes as it all lasts, letting these swells of drones and strings rise in the background of it all. Even though it's kind of patient, there's a sort of odd sense of urgency to it as well, especially with the percussion and the constant ringing of guitar notes that push it all along at a slightly more fervent pace before ending on the slow descent into that very strange little melody. It is actually a delightful way to start off this album that creates a certain sense of cautious apprehension, but one that suggests there's going to be a lot to enjoy on this album in terms of the textures and the tones and the vibes that the band are presenting. Very cool stuff. So then we of course move on to track 2, and this is where the sort of melody becomes one that is a lot more cautious than what we've had in the opening. A lot more intimidating perhaps, as its notes land so heavily on that sense of worry and apprehension. Especially of course with the slight rattle of percussion in the background, landing on those tribalistic drum hits, backed up by the rising drones in the background of it all. It just ends up feeling like a musical experience that is constantly aware of the looming danger, as though the very waves are crashing all around us, threatening to capsize us and pull us down into those dark, murky depths below. It is quite a vibe, I have to say, and it's one that certainly feels very different, at least to me, than the sort of oddly quaint, charming album opener. But what I like is what the band have done with this one. Because there's kind of this monolithic push from those drums, and that constant loop of that guitar line is backed up by these really nice droning layers that sound like guitars and strings. I believe so anyway. I'm not 100% sure because there's not really much of an indication of what any of the band members are playing on this album, but you just gotta go with what you can, right? Regardless though, whatever they are playing is making some really lovely textures here, and it all feels rather doomy, or at least more doomy than it has any right being. Especially when it descends with that bass guitar into these slight moments of intensity. Like from there though, it becomes a bit more fervent, almost approaching levels of chaotic delusions where you expect the instruments to just explode in a crash of distortion and effect. However, it feels like the band have instead opted to continue the slow crawl that the track has presented thus far, and exercise more restraint in the composition. For me, it kind of oddly enough reminds me of some of the kind of things we heard on the likes of Orphaned by the Ocean by Teeth of the Sea, except where Teeth of the Sea have a lot more of a sort of like aggressive prog vibe to their music. Here everything's a lot more subtle, a lot more down-tempo. And whereas Teeth of the Sea would build it up to those crescendos, of course, dominated by those amazing solos from Jimmy, right? Here, it just all leads to moments of apprehension before falling right back into place, to where they've already been so far. It creates for us this very odd little dynamic that the album's presenting to us, something that I find really interesting in the world of instrumental rock music, and it's kind of unlike the kind of thing I'm normally used to, I would say. Instead of building to loud crescendos, the Weird Weeds just seem to instead insist on keeping the vibe going on at their very slow pace, resulting in something a lot more interesting as a result of being so different, I'd say. But as well, all of those textures at work and that unsettling vibe is just really cool stuff, I have to say. Moving along to the next track, we have track 3, I guess we can call it, and this one features greater prominence of the string instrument, or what I think is the string instrument. Like I said, I have no idea. But they're creating this lovely ambient bed of sorts against this backdrop of peculiar percussive effects and rattling guitar sounds. And the drums are once again continuing that almost monolithic push, just opting for that wonderfully slow, doomy tempo, albeit presented to us in this oddly slowcore style of music instead. But I love the strangeness of the sounds of the palette, of the music palette on this one, especially with the abstract nature of some of those notes being pulled and affected in such odd little ways. Like the vibe on this one feels, once again, a little bit different to what we've had on the previous tracks. Still oddly enough, tying it into that odd aesthetic that the album's cover is presenting to us, of course. This sort of quaint look at an older time, of being aboard old ships at sea. The way the guitar parts just seem to resonate out into the vast ocean with those repeated twangs of notes, and just results in something that feels like it's capturing something old and quaint. And yet, at the same time, oddly relaxing, as the pull of, almost representative of the pull of various equipment of ropes, pulleys and strings, aboard these wooden ships. And as a result, it makes for such a strange listening experience, doesn't it? It's perhaps as though we have gotten past the odd moment of turmoil from the previous track, and instead we have found ourselves now drifting gently across to the shore as the ships just rise and falls with the very waves themselves, creating this nice little vibe for us to occupy as we sort of allow our stomachs to settle a bit from the seasickness. I'd say this is a very pleasant track on this album, one that is continuing that slow crawl of navigation across the currents of the ocean. Some gentle post-rock styling for us to inhabit. And it all feels very unusual. Like, for me, it kind of captures sort of post-rock style, but not quite as well, especially in context to what post-rock became or had to become anyway. When it comes to something like this feels much more akin to the kinds of things Windsor for the Derby were doing, especially on their first album, Calm Hades Float, where it was much more about creating these very strange little sound worlds for us to occupy, essentially. And it makes for something very interesting, with these very odd textures of music, creates so many emotions and vibes. Moving swiftly along though, we get to our next track of track 4. And this one opens with a sort of colliding of notes that travel down the length of the guitar, scratches built into it all as they slide across the very strings themselves, it feels. And it loops over for a couple of instances, before we're greeted by a couple of gentle droning layers, accompanied by a little descent on what I think is the double bass maybe. It's another different vibe once again, one that feels, after the last track, capturing more of that apprehension once again. As though this album is constantly teetering the line between urgency and caution perhaps. But I like the more ambient soundscape that this one conjures up though, broken up perhaps by that repeated little guitar line, and then the gentle crashing of the drums sounding like the very waves themselves splashing against the very rocks. It's another vibe certainly, pushing it all along once again with that odd sort of slow chord jazzy pace. And it kind of reminds me, just to go off on another tangent here, of how a lot of post-rock I seem to enjoy, or some of it anyway, it seems to take a lot of influence and core concepts from the ideas of jazz music, applying it to similar instrumental genres, albeit one that contains a much different sound palette. This is something that draws me a lot to the music of Do Make Say Think, especially with their drummer, just holding everything together with those jazzy structures essentially. But then you get it in a lot of other bands as well, and I think, jazz and post-rock, they kind of go a bit hand in hand at times. But in this one, it's very weird how it's all coming across though, because it's not jazz, but it's also not quite post-rock, it's just something, isn't it? I think it comes across to me on this particular one though, on this particular track, because of the interplay between those bassy notes and the very sparse drum patterns here. It seems to just meander around this little vignette for a few moments, establishing the scene before it directly falls into the next track of track 5. And so this one seems to build up upon the previous track by turning the guitar pattern into this loop that's a lot more cautious sounding, taking the centre stage as it climbs around the notes before paving the way for this very peculiar little number that comes in with the drums. And suddenly, the rest of the band all come into this one, and we're given such a wonderfully peculiar little musical number that feels so vastly different from everything we've heard before, not in terms of the actual sound palette, it's all the same instruments, it's all the same band members, but rather the vibes that the music is presenting here. This one, weirdly enough, is still pushing a sense of urgency, with the melody and tune almost getting trapped within the very structuring itself, letting it all stutter in stasis for incredibly long moments as the drums just push it along with that same beat almost. But it really opens up though, sort of a third of the way through, I want to say, when you get this gorgeous little bass melody that starts to drive it all along so nicely, before leaving a lot of room for these very experimental abstractions. A peculiar little composition on this album that seems to constantly be navigating towards different landscapes the more it all progresses, letting the instrumentals really climb around such strange, unique moments of abstraction almost, before it all continues to build up and collapse at the same time. Really unusual stuff, but I just love how every time a new element is introduced into this composition, whatever texture from whatever instrument it is, of course, it's like the band, they just prolong its inclusion into composition for as long as they want. Just really holding on to it instead of letting it be just this little brief moment. And for me, it kind of comes across that they're playing these little connecting bridges between the different passages in this song. And instead of playing it for a single bar, they let it play for many instead, creating these little tendrils and sort of connections between all the different moments on this composition. Incredibly strange and unusual, but wonderfully delightful, and such an enigmatic little composition that further pushes this bizarre journey that the whole album has been navigating towards thus far. And definitely, I think, probably one of my favourites of this whole album. I believe as well there's actually a music video that has been made for this particular song. A weird, esoteric video of imagery and colours and shapes, of course. But it's really neat that there's some promotional material for this little album as well, just hidden away in the corners of the internet. But yeah, definitely one of my favourites one, and it's interesting how it all just kind of just continues that sort of journey along until it all just stops right at the end, just stops onto nothing. And then it allows us to just go into our next track of track 6. And this one, it kind of introduces itself with a strange lick on the guitar that's gently backed up by the rising anxiety of those ambient droning passages, all of which are pushed by this very gentle yet prominent drum pattern. This one feels very odd though, having this odd circular quality of spinning around and around and around, getting lost in the gentle meanderings that the compositions have been presenting. Maybe like gazing into a whirlpool, perhaps. Though, of course, a lot of anxiety and danger for our characters on the album cover, isn't it? But yes, I feel like as a result though of what this one's doing, it's kind of recalling some similar vibes that was presented on the album's second track. A suggestion of something more ominous looming over the surface, hidden behind these great waves that come in through the horizon itself. And once again, you've kind of got that odd interplay between a sparse melody on the guitar, pushed along by a very odd jazz aesthetic in terms of the percussion elements. Weird, but very intriguing, and constantly pulling you along for this strange journey that this entire album has been presenting to us. This one does build up rather nicely though, letting the drums really take centre stage with this harder hit on the snare that kind of changes up the vibe of this particular composition, letting it all hit harder as the cymbals crash around and the strings, if they are strings, creating these very wonderful droning passages behind it all. It's another weird presentation that feels to me like the constantly changing nature of waves themselves, suddenly going from gentle to cautious to dangerous perhaps, expressed to us in the form of this incredibly free-flowing composition. Unusual, but I think it's a very cool place that this whole album has navigated us towards, one that is still totally in keeping with the strange enigmatic vibe that of the album itself, but still showing the different details of that vignette of the people pulling the boat ashore, right? But to move along, we get to track 7. And this one has that sense of urgency once more, but a gentle vibe still embedded within it, especially with those gentle levels of percussion that push it all along. Like the guitars seem to just noodle around nicely on this little lick, playing a lovely assortment that is once again backed up by that peculiar sound palette that by this point is very familiar to us as listeners. And this one has a bit of a playful vibe to it though, a bit more fun to be had as it continues to just explore its own abstractions, especially with the drones and the strings that esoterically pull these unusually long passages of singular notes in amongst the strange mix of instrumentals that is all occurring here. And I think it's a very delightful and charming track that we have here, and one that helps to alleviate some of the more anxious moments that this album has been exploring in so many of its different tracks essentially. And whilst it can be a bit of a rocky journey, especially on this whole album, from track to track, presenting to us so many different kinds of emotions and different levels of anxiety and uncertainty. It's something very charming and nice about how the Weird Weeds have presented all of that to us on this particular album, letting the strange esoteric nature of their sound palette present to us all of these different feelings and emotions in the form of this very strange instrumental music. Like, even within the compositions themselves, including this one, you get sudden strange breakdowns into new sections, with this one falling wonderfully into a strange level of abstraction that pulls some of the most unusual notes and tones from a variety of instruments here, sounding unlike their respective instruments at times for the most part, and instead like the very creaking of the wooden boards used to hold these incredibly old ships together. I think it's kind of neat that it does this, because it actually kind of reminds me a little bit of the sort of rusty wooden aesthetic that we get on a lot of albums from Sedimental Records. The sort of naturalistic sounds of, just buildings and wooden structures essentially, creating these sort of creaking moments though. And it adds a lot of character to the sort of the songs itself here. It's interesting because in context of Sedimental Records, it's so odd to have something that's straightforward, but even within that, it's doing a lot of different things here and there that tie in so perfectly to what the label represents of strange outsider music. As a result though as well, this particular track, I think it's definitely one of my favourites in that, it does quite a few different things across its runtime, as well as recalling back to some of the strange emotions that we've experienced on this album thus far, and yep, definitely one of my favourites here. Very cool stuff. So, on to track 8, which is our penultimate song. By now we have spent a fair amount of time with the weird weeds here, and we're approaching the end of the whole thing. So coming in straight from the previous track, number 8 continues to push from that strange sound palette that dominated a lot of the previous songs, backed up by this strange little guitar line that supported so sparsely from the drums. It is such a slow track that this one, to me, feels like being lost in the middle of nowhere, almost like being adrift in the middle of the sea itself, looking out upon the very stillness of the water as light just reflects its rays across it, bouncing it up and just attacking your vision and blinding you essentially. Once again, kind of similar to the previous track, I kind of love how creaky and old the instrumental sounds on this one, acting very strangely across the composition, but presented to us some unique little sound interactions, including these odd little breathy little moments that could be the pull of some instrument maybe, but once again, I just have no idea. There's not a lot of information on this thing here. But whatever it is, it's so unusual, and to me, it makes this particular composition feel like one of the most abstract out of all of them. At least one of the most abstract thus far, even though there's only one more song to go. But it's definitely a highlight in terms of its incredible uniqueness though, and especially in how strange it is, and another one of my favourites I have to say. It just perfectly encapsulates this odd vibe that we presented with across the whole length of this album, further pushing it so delightfully by this point into this area of just trying to figure out where are we and what is going on. But moving along to the finale, we get track 9. So we end up with the longest track on this album here, leading in comfortably from the previous track with this rather lovely little guitar melody, backed up by the pull of those strings and the rising feedback from one of the electric guitars. Maybe. Hard for me to know. But with the vibe this one is presenting though, it feels to me like a lovely little moment of contemplation that ends everything just so serenely and nicely. After all of that apprehension and caution, we now have a sense of optimism coming in across the instrumentals on this one, as though everyone has safely made it to shore, safely made it to where they were trying to get to despite the tumultuous and unpredictable nature of the very sea itself. That even through the crashing of the waves or the still stagnant waters, we've safely sailed across the channel and arrived safely upon land. I think there's something lovely about it. And it just feels like a logical conclusion to this very strange album to me. This strange esoteric journey across the sea. It's just something I feel especially when it comes to this album, because it's essentially from gazing into the strange album cover, of course. That this one, was more about arriving on dry land. But weirdly enough, when I always felt like it was all just about that sort of journey of just being on the land, essentially. But when sitting down to review this one, to review it for the show, I actually found listening to the music and getting lost in what my brain was interpreting as the story, to find it be more about the actual journey of navigation, of kind of leaving the safety of our homes to treacherous seas and finding ourselves arriving on dry land right at the end of everything, right at the end of this journey. I don't know if it's an intentional thing the Weird Weeds have done, but it's something that just comes across to me when listening to this particular album, and now just how the story goes in my particular head. It's essentially, I think it's very cool, and I think this track, it's a wonderful send-off to everything we have experienced. Really just letting that little guitar melody do the main pushing of the song, accompanied by the drums, of course, whilst guitars and strings just swell wildly as the composition all develops, though. But like the other ones, I adore the sound palette on this one though. Just the particulars in the way the instrumental sound on this performance. Some incredibly satisfying timbres to the very instruments themselves, especially when they hold onto their notes for such satisfyingly long amounts of time. It's another favourite of mine, and I have to say, it probably is just that side 2 might just be my favourite part of this thing, right? Something that just feels a nice place to have slowly built up towards across the entire length of this album, ending on a final gentle contemplative note. With that, we have essentially finished covering Self-Titled by the Weird Weeds here. A strange album, no doubt. One that seems to eschew traditions that were established by the post-rock genre in the surrounding years this album was released. And instead presenting us this all sort of folksy, jazzy little experience instead that is not an effort to create something in that vein, but just an effort to make music that just happens to sound like this, I guess. It is one that doesn't build up to loud crescendos and tumultuous breakdown of instrumentals, but instead just continues a slow crawl that many of the instruments are all pushing along. A gentle pushing of instrumental alternative rock performances that present this very strange journey, enigmatic journey that we as listeners we kind of have to completely interpret it based on our own feelings and understanding of this album. And for me, going on the vibes of the music, and the most telling of information in this case, which in this instance was the album's artwork, as I've mentioned, it has me interpreting the story as being navigation across the sea, as you know. It's just something about the quaint instrumentals. It seems like they're capturing the essence of a time now forgotten, perhaps, one that existed long ago almost, back when people used the very wind to transport themselves across the vast open sea. But it's all slightly offset by the odder notions, suggested to us by the appearance of an oil tanker in the vast distance of the album's image, its thick black plumes of smoke stretching up to the sky in a display of modernity, or at least modern to its time, perhaps. It's kind of cool, because I don't know how much of that is intentional by the band. And certainly when it comes to albums like this, where every track is completely unnamed, I assume that the band's intention is for us to interpret it however we want to. Like maybe they did have a story in mind when they pieced together the entirety of this album, stitched together the composition into the track listing presented to us. That does, in of itself, navigate its own strange journey through varying different moods. Definitely representative of this kind of concept of journey across the sea, of course, but whether intentional or not, it's up to the Weird Weeds to know, right? But as listeners, we get to have fun in delighting in interpreting it in our own ways, however the music comes across us, and that for me is the joy of listening to experimental music. Like just getting your own experience out of it, whatever that may be. I find it very cool, and although my own interpretations, I'm going to say, they feel very flawed, because I'm perhaps entirely relying on my own intuition, it is what it is, but maybe that's the point. Who knows? But with that, I think we'll be coming to the end of our episode of Weird Music. I'm glad to have finally talked about the Weird Weeds here. Perhaps the best band name for inclusion on this show, right? I cannot deny something that literally has weird in the title, right? Then again, we haven't reviewed Weird Al Yankovic, but maybe we should. But to be fair, weird it definitely seems to be. Something about this whole album just feels so strange to me, like from its literally untitled tracks to the strange image of people pulling that boat ashore. It results in something that feels very unique, even if a little bit incomprehensible in places, but also just a perfect presentation of strange abstract music. I've always enjoyed returning to this album from time to time, and like so many things, something I've always wanted to present on this show. Essentially why I wanted to buy the vinyl cover for the vinyl release for this, so I can actually have the physical copy of this. But yes, I mean, to be fair though, it's moot to actually mention that there's so many things I want to review, because there's such a vast number of albums I want to cover and review on this show, that a lot of them I'm never going to get around to, but I'm going to try my best. But yeah, the Weird Weeds, definitely one of them. So yeah, I do hope you've enjoyed either discovering them or hearing my strange opinions about them and my interpretations, and maybe whatever. With that though, I would like to thank you for watching today's episode of Weird Music then. I wish you all the best. Take care. Bye bye for now. Bye bye.